Hi everyone in cloud computing, and welcome to episode 16 of the Cloud Computing Australia show with Brad Nelson and the world's #1 cloud industry expert and thought leader David Linthicum. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialist, placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. This week we're excited to have as our special guests the CTO and CEO of Hyperscalers, Anoonay, Sinha and George Cvetanovski. The Hyperscalers is a next generation infrastructure provider operating out of Australia, USA, Europe, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea and India. Hi Dave and George and Anoonay, a warm welcome to you all. It's exciting to have you all on the Australia show this week.
Great to be here. Brad, David, thanks very much for having us. Very excited.
Hi, Brad and David. Great to be here. Thanks.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, David.
That's great, guys. In this week's show, we're talking about what is the fit for hyperscalers technology within the Global 2000 enterprises, and what are the benefits to Australian companies, and what can they find with the hyperscalers. So over to you guys.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks again for having us.
Yep.
So for enterprises, like commercial cloud service providers, Hyperscalers is out to solve the problem of complexity in the IT industry simply through standardization of best practices, automation, and economies of scale. So we think the fit for our technology is just as applicable for very large enterprises as it is for our cloud service customers. So from our laboratories, what we do is create appliances, that is IP based appliances to solve a wide range of problems, everything from infrastructure as a service type outcomes to platform as a service type outcomes to big data analytics type outcomes, high performance computing, deep learning, software-defined networking. We've got a 5G ongoing project at the moment with the University of Sydney, among some other exciting stuff we probably won't talk to you about today.
So ultimately, you know, this is an infrastructure play that you guys are producing. This is so important right now to organizations, you know, that I'm consulting with that are trying to take everything, you know, to the next level. They're trying to move to cloud, but they're also trying to modernize their existing internal infrastructure. So ultimately, you know, what's kind of the pitch that you guys are providing, kind of beyond what you just stated, in terms of if I'm a Global 2000 enterprise, I'm dealing with 30-year-old technology. It's failing all the time. Outages I'm moving, you know, aspects of it to the cloud, but I can't move everything to the cloud. So how can you help me, Hyperscaler?
Become a cloud service provider. So we're seeing a shift where the IT departments are in fact becoming internal service providers, where they spring up a infrastructure as a service platform, be it the Red Hat OpenStack, be it Canonical OpenStack, be it OpenQRM. These are just some of the OpenStack flavors that we have. And they can be either deliverable, they're built by hyperscalers. We don't operate, but any one of our partners could operate on their behalf to deliver all the benefits of clouds, less its limitations, which you mentioned one of them, David. So other limitations would include, you know, security, sovereignty. That latency is certainly a big one, but what we enable enterprises to do is to unify their resource pools of compute, network, storage capacities with the view of squeezing the most out of those resource pools, be it with you know, selling it off to internal customers, or at least accounting for that usage. And potentially even external customers, David. External customers could also come on board and enterprises cloud. So within any community, be it defense and intelligence, be it education community, be it you know, government community of agencies, the cloud becomes that community cloud where lots of different agencies' owned clouds could be hybrid back to another agency's cloud or the community cloud. So it solves the problem, I think, of underutilization simply through making those resources available within the community, or making that hybrid connection back to Azure, for example, like we have with Azure Stack.
Yeah, I did some research on hyperscaling architecture when I was with GigaOM, and it's obviously matured a lot in the last 2 years since I left GigaOM. Ultimately, this is technology that's kind of plug and play in terms of high performance systems. So in other words, the network backplane is set, it's cached and it's tuned exactly for the types of applications that are in there. There's not a lot of latency between the applications and the processors and the I/O subsystems, things like that. And it was kind of seemed to me, and obviously this is kind of a new trend going on even besides cloud, and this is a huge convergence that we're just probably not hearing enough about in the enterprises. So ultimately, what would be the value sell for this? If I'm going to do a cloud sell, I'm going to be able to sell the value of cloud in a number of ways: agility and cost reduction, things like that. Let's say I have a mile of data center space. I'm spending $100 million a year on operations infrastructure. I'm trying to get out of this business. I am trying to do cloud services internally, build private clouds, virtualize systems, their utilization of existing systems. So what kind of value can I expect if I'm leveraging your technology?
I think in terms of value, the hyperscale infrastructure is probably a new trend coming up. I see it as a next step from the conventional infrastructure we have been using. In terms of values, I see from the architecture perspective, the way you can do load balancing, you can distribute your load across multi-nodes or disaggregated storage. You can distribute your compute strength across the nodes or across the servers you design within this hyperscale concept. And in terms of economics, I think the power consumption and the way you manage these racks, it is much more convenient. I mean, since it is a next generation architecture, the way you do cabling for it, the way the heating and cooling system of the complete chassis is designed, that sort of gives value to it, and it saves your power consumption. It improves the performance because the load is much better way balanced across the architecture. So I think these are the points which adds value to big enterprises and adds a lot of strength in terms of the sustenance of these architectures.
And I'll probably add to that, from a higher level perspective, in that the problems traditionally the enterprises like cloud providers have experienced is in complexity, in putting together a set of disparate systems. Just in the hardware layer, there could be 3 different layers. Just in the hypervisor layer, there could be many different brands. In the orchestration layer, there could be many different brands. From our laboratory here, we demonstrate many different types, probably about 7 different types of OpenStack. And then there's the operating system layer, and then there's the apps on top of that. So I think the real value that we're able to provide our customers is in removing a lot of that complexity simply through standardization of best practices, simply through automation tools, and only then economies of scale become possible. Economies of scale haven't been possible up until now simply because of the high level of customization required in any holistic solution, be it a orchestrated cloud environment or be it a high-performance computing cluster. What we found is that disparate vendors come together on site for the very first time quite often, and that leads to all kinds of challenges, from interoperability issues to non-optimization to being able to retain the skilled staff necessary to maintain those systems throughout their useful life.
And just quickly, guys, if I could just jump in, would there be any way that you could briefly give an example of how your standardization of the business processes and best practices have been implemented? Just an example of what it looked like before that, and an example of how hyperscalers have done that afterwards.
I think a good example is probably even the very large software makers, right? Traditionally, they would consult on a very custom, very one-time engineered stack, and customers would end up having to pay a lot of money. By preloading their software and optimizing that stack through our design process, along with our appliance utility optimizer tool, we're able to now deliver, outcomes that are, that are very holistic, that are deliverable quickly, reliably, and a fraction of historical costs. So we're even seeing the software makers make this move over to holistic solutions in order to provide outcomes that are, standardized and very repeatable.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, the value we add in terms of identifying the bottlenecks at each level of infrastructure, starting bottom up from which CPU to use, which hard disk to use, what is the best orchestration layer, and then going on to which is the correct storage software which can solve customer problems. So we have these optimizer tools in terms of agentless software stack, which can deep dive into every layer of this infrastructure and give you the performance benchmark numbers. And that adds the value when we sort of create the whole stack design for the appliance.
Yeah.
So is there any plan on teaming with private cloud providers, some of the OpenStack distros, things like that? Obviously other private cloud providers, virtualization providers out there to kind of provide something that's out of the box, ready for the enterprise, someone can plug and play within their enterprise?
We are working on that. We are working with companies like Red Hat, with whom we are partnering to get this solution to go in open source domain. Although we are very primitive in those discussions, but I foresee that an application like this would solve or would be helpful to a lot of telcos or enterprises who are moving towards more hybrid type of infrastructure, private plus public, and partnering with software vendors in this domain would sort of ease the process of releasing it. But as of now, we are trying to get into that, and for sure in next few months we will have some release where this solution would tie up with the larger software vendors.
Look, we already have private and public cloud customers on our books that have used these stacks already. From a private cloud perspective, typically it's like an enterprise that would kind of adopt this. From a public cloud perspective, we've got lots and lots of customers that are public cloud, and what we do is commoditize or productize their IP on our hardware before just sending it out or deploying it on site for the very first time, not knowing what's going to happen. So you need to build a private cloud before it can become a public cloud, before you can have lots of external customers or third parties accessing that resource pool. So really, the stack is absolutely no different.
That makes a ton of sense. So I guess my last question is, where can our listeners find out more about your products, more about your company?
Yep. So on our website, I think what we've built is a laboratory as a service. It's the world's first, where customers could get access to any one of the standardized IP appliances, and we have everything from, well, let's talk about the Red Hat ones: Red Hat Ceph, Red Hat OpenStack, Red Hat OpenShift. That's really good for containers, the latter one. The OpenStack is, of course, infrastructure as a service. They can even test out Azure Stack, and we're doing that on behalf of Avanade, right? They have the rights to for Azure Stack. Then next center, we've got OpenQRM. We have MoxRox. Now these are all different flavors of OpenStack. So through our laboratory as a service, customers can bring along their workloads. Customers are able to systematically test their workloads on any one of these appliances I've just mentioned, with the view of finding the right one for their business. There's just no other way to do that.
On our website, we as well provide a VPN access to any of these appliances. in case customer wants to drop their load and see how the appliance is performing.
Yep.
We have those facilities, and we can enable any customer to test their loads on.
They can also come into our laboratories and see what it's like to take an owner's approach to these cloud appliances, and what the difference would be in terms of speeds of accessing those resources through the internet versus accessing those resources through the data center.
Well, it's a great story. I'm looking forward to learning more about it and keeping up with you guys. I mean, it's the right technology at the right time. I think a lot of enterprises are looking for these sorts of stacks, which are going to be able to provide high performance and best bang for the buck. So, all right, back to you, Brad.
Thanks, George, and thanks, Anoonay, for being part of the Australia show. It's great to have the Hyperscalers team on the show this week.
Brad, David, thanks very much. It's been a great pleasure having us. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, David. It was a great discussion. Thanks again.
That's awesome. Thanks. And thanks again for you being part of the show, David, as well.
Thanks, guys. It's great to learn more about technology.
What I'm going to do is pop the URL, which is hyperscalers.com, in the description box. You can catch Hyperscalers. They're on Twitter, by the way, which is at Hyperscalers, and David's on Twitter, which is at David Linthicum. I'm also on Twitter, obviously, which is at Nelson_Hilliard. Thanks for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the shows so you can catch up on our previous shows and the ones coming up. Thanks again for watching.